In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos postgame reaction podcast following a 20-7 victory by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers over your Toronto Argonauts. This podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant. I am solo today. JB apparently stuck on an island somewhere. We'll check on that a bit later. Look, we lost the game. It's upsetting, but the first thing I want to say before we get into anything else is this is not a reason at all to panic. There are some concerns. There's no question. There always are after a loss, and especially after a loss in a shortened season. No question. However, this was never going to be a game that Toronto was going to win. It just was set up for failure from the beginning. Back-to-back road games are always death for football teams. Add into that this is a shorter week, the Argos with 2 fewer days. They're again on the road, so really it turned into almost 4 fewer days of prep time. And you're playing the defending Grey Cup champions, who seem to be, at this point, the best team in the league, the team to beat. And the Argonauts were in this game in the fourth quarter. Somehow, even though the offense was invisible for almost 3 entire quarters, there was a moment in the game where the Argonauts were actually in a position to take the lead, to go ahead. It could have happened. Things went sideways really quickly there, but this isn't a game that you can look back at and say, the Argos, they blew it. They don't belong. They're not going to be a good team this year. None of that is true. This, if anything, should be an inspiring performance. It's one of those that you look at and you say, yeah, with all of the stuff that went against the Argonauts, from the scheduling to the being on the road to getting stuck in Calgary last week for an extra day at the airport, to the injuries that the team suffered today, to the performance issues that they had through the first 2.5 quarters, some bad breaks that they had as well. All of that, you throw that all away. At the end of the day, the Argos were in it against a great team. And I expect them to actually win this rematch next week at BMO. I think they're going to win that game. I don't think at this point they're a better team than the Blue Bombers. I do think they will be a better team. And I saw a lot of great stuff tonight. We're going to talk about some of that too. This will be a little bit of a therapy session perhaps for parts of the podcast. And that's okay. Sometimes we need that after a loss. So let's just do a recap and then we'll get a bit more into things. So in terms of a recap, the game started off as a defensive battle. And of course that would continue. That was a theme that went on throughout the evening. The first scoring play went to Winnipeg. Zach Collaros with a bomb to Bailey. It was a 35-yard touchdown pass. Shaq Richardson in coverage. That one was so close to being an incomplete pass. Shaq Richardson in cover zero, he's got a really tough assignment there, and he was half a step away from, actually even less than that. It was like 2 inches away from being able to tip that pass. And not only that, as Bailey brought it in, Shaq was trying to rip the ball away and he almost had it. He was almost able to free that up. And that could have been a big difference too, because that was a 2nd and 5 play from the 35. On that play, what happened is Creston Butler came in on a blitz, which actually Coach Young did quite a lot in this game. And then he was using that to set up something later that almost turned into a huge play. I'll talk about that in a second. But Creston Butler was on a safety blitz in run support. Essentially, this was a run blitz. He didn't come in tearing after the quarterback. He came in late on a blitz to stop the runner. Unfortunately, this was a passing play, and you're left with a wide open middle of the field. And it was, anytime you've got a post and there's no safety in the middle of the field, that's where a quarterback's going to go. It was a great ball from Collaros and an amazing catch from Bailey. But yeah, Shaq was just that close. So 7-0 Winnipeg at the end of the first quarter. The only other score in the first half was the very last play of the first half. Krapina with a 22-yard field goal, and the defense did really well to keep Winnipeg out of the end zone there. That would have felt backbreaking if on that last play or the second last play of the half, if they'd have been able to get in the end zone. But the defense, they showed up tonight, and they were there all night. Every time they needed a big play, every time they needed a huge stop, they did it. And once again, forcing Winnipeg to kick a field goal in that situation was a massive win. And going into halftime, I was thinking, if Toronto can just find a way to respond, if they can come out on this first drive of the second half and really do something with the ball, then we're in business. But unfortunately, they much like with the first half, they just couldn't get it going. They finally get on the board after a quarterback change, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in more detail. So the last play that Mcleod Bethel-Thompson had was an overthrow of a wide open Tavares Daniels, who had a double move. He was out of the left slot. I think he was lined up in the slot, had a double move, turned that into sort of a fade down the outside, and was wide open. He would have been gone. And Mcleod saw him the whole way. He set up the double move perfectly with that little pump fake, that little shoulder shrug, but he overthrew Tavares and overthrew him by 7 or 8 yards. And he knew it right away. As soon as he released that pass, he went to his knees because he knew he missed one. And I think he probably sensed at that stage in the game, knowing how things had been going near the end of the third quarter, still no points on the board. The writing was on the wall. And sure enough, next possession, Nick Arbuckle comes out there, and he looked fantastic. And I'll get into that afterwards. Once we finish our summary, we'll talk about the Arbuckle versus Mcleod performances. So Arbuckle's first drive, a very different looking style of offense, and it culminates with a John White 30-yard run. John White was just absolutely amazing tonight. And I'm not a huge believer in running backs. And what I mean by that is I think that for the most part, a running back to me is what your offensive line is. Running production mostly comes from your offensive line. That's my belief, and not everyone is with me on that. Now, I also believe running backs should be paid extremely well because I think they take punishment like nobody else. However, if you're looking at it just strictly from an outside X's and O's point of view, I feel running backs are largely replaceable. However, John White did some things tonight that aren't easily replaceable. He had a few runs that were entirely him. There was one that sticks out in my mind. It was in the first half, and Toronto was pinned deep in their end, as they were a few times. And John White had a big run to the outside, and it really looked like Ricky Collins Jr. was the one that sort of sprung him free. Ricky Collins had this beautiful seal block. But if you look at that play carefully, what it is that John White set that up beautifully. He came to the outside. He saw the block that he had, the potential for the block he had on the outside, but he helped Ricky Collins Jr. set that block up by taking a quick little jab step back into the inside lane. And what that caused the defender to do was pause for a second. That allowed Ricky Collins Jr. to get in perfect position for a seal. And now John White bounced it to the outside. White did that kind of thing a few times tonight. His touchdown run was magnificent. There's also a feel that he has, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later when I get into RPOs, but that touchdown run was an RPO, a run pass option. And if you're not familiar with those, I'm going to do a video piece on those a bit later this week, so make sure you check that out. But basically what that is it's up to the quarterback. Both a run and a pass are called. The linemen are blocking it like a run, which means if the quarterback chooses to pass, it has to be a quick release. And on that touchdown run, there was what we call a Z quick going on Arbuckle's left. So he had a quick screen to Gittins Jr. if he wanted it. And so what he's got to do in that play, as he's sort of, riding the handoff to White, he's watching what's happening with the linebackers and how they're responding to the play. He saw action back there. So he saw them tearing off towards Gittins Jr. And so at the very last second, he releases that ball to White, and White makes that touchdown run. But there's skill there for the running back too. It's a really difficult thing to do, to run with the ball but not grab it out of the quarterback's hands, to sort of kind of gently cradle it until you feel that the quarterback's arm is no longer there and it's yours to run with. And John White is a great RPO running back. So some credit goes to him on that touchdown run, but throughout the game, especially once Arbuckle came in, because they ran a lot more RPOs with Arbuckle than they did with Mcleod Bethel-Thompson. So Argos are finally on the board. It's now 10-7. We're near the end of the third quarter. The Argos are in it. And then there was a real opportunity. Remember how I talked about those Creston Butler run blitzes? So Coach Young had been setting something up. Now, he wasn't just running those run blitzes for nothing. They were working. The Argos defense against the run was incredibly good. And we'll get to stats after we go through this summary. But what he was setting up was the play that almost was a game changer. So Zach Collaros drops back to pass. He sees Creston Butler coming in on another run blitz, which he had several times. And again, the middle of the field's wide open. He's got a post route called. And so, like I said before, like on that touchdown pass to Bailey, that's where you're going to go in the middle of the field's wide open. However, this was Coach Young with a brilliant move. Jamal Peters, playing the boundary corner, actually was baiting Collaros, and he slipped over to the middle of the field. He had rolling coverage on that, and he actually had deep middle on that play. And so while technically the post route should be open, it wasn't, because there is middle coverage. Jamal Peters comes flying over there, and he almost had what would have been his second pick of the game. And man, that would have been a huge momentum swing. But unfortunately, it was for naught. He just couldn't quite bring it in. And that was pretty much it for the Argos, and they just didn't really get back in it again. There was some more scoring in the fourth quarter. Zach Collaros with another touchdown pass, this one to Dembski. This was a pretty tough one for Jeff Richards, who was in coverage. It wasn't zero. They had sort of a combo coverage going on that play. So on the one side of the field where they had the trips lined up, there was sort of a zone coverage going on there. I don't actually think Richards had help regardless of the scenario. Often on that play, it had sort of a cover one look to it, but that's not what was going on. And so I think Richards actually did not have any help to the inside, even though there was, the freeze sitting there. And that's why Richards played him with an inside shade. And Winnipeg was running basically a smash concept, which means their slot receiver was running a corner route, and the outside receiver had a short route, a hook that kind of turned into a dig. And the problem is a corner route, when you've got inside shade, if a corner route is run perfectly and thrown perfectly, it's just impossible to stop. It's always your look when you've got man on one side of the field and you've got a smash concept. If you can hit that pass, that difficult corner route, then it's going to be there, and that's usually what you'll try and do. If you're going to that side of the field in man coverage, that's where you're going to go every time. And it was a perfect ball, and it was a nice catch by Dembski, a really nice route by Dembski too. But it's hard to blame Richards on that. That was really the only concept you didn't want to see on that side of the field with that play call. And unfortunately, they connected on it. So 17-7 at that point. They added a late field goal with 2 minutes left, a short field goal. Tyler Crepigna, who connected from 22 yards. We know those short field goals, he just never misses, and he didn't tonight. And that just put it away at 20-7. The Argos had a couple of chances late to kind of get back into it, but it just never really felt like that was going to happen. Let's take a look at some of these stats. And if you had showed me some of these stats prior to the game, some of them, I would have told you that the Argos won the game. And I'm talking about the rushing stats here. The leading rusher for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who are the best rushing team in the CFL, Brady Oliveira, who crushed Hamilton in week 1. Remember, they had almost 150 yards rushing, was Winnipeg's leading rusher, 13 carries for 29 yards. Averaging 2.2 yards a carry. Everyone else that ran the ball only had 1 carry. So, Brady's the guy that was carrying the load for the Blue Bombers, 2.2 yards a carry. That's an astonishingly good run defense from the Toronto Argonauts, who also had to play through an injury to Coney Ely, one of the big run stoppers that they sort of counted on in this game. He got hurt early. We'll talk about the injuries a bit later, too. But what a performance. Sam Champong played brilliantly in the middle. Oakman was awesome as well. He had a really good game, and the linebacker play up the middle was excellent. Enoch Mwamba just came in and closed holes. They relied heavily on that blitzing that we talked about earlier from Creston Butler. He did a nice job wrapping guys up. And then you had the halfbacks, Jeff Richards, Shaq Richardson, who came flying in on a couple of occasions and really punished Oliveira. It was a difficult day for the Winnipeg ground game, and it really forced them to give up on it. And we kind of thought the reverse would happen. Now, on the other side of the ball, John White with 12 carries for 111 yards, averaging 9.2 yards a carry. That is a running game. And I honestly thought these numbers were going to be reversed. Toronto couldn't run the ball to save their lives last week in Calgary. And Winnipeg, as I said, I think they're the best rushing team in the CFL. They were last year. That's how they won the Grey Cup. What a performance by Toronto's run defense, and what an outstanding performance from the run game, the offensive line in the run game, but also an individual effort from John White, who did a terrific job. But as always, you have to give credit to the O-line. They didn't have an amazing game today in pass protection. It's tough. Winnipeg's got the best defensive line in the league. No one is going to look great as an offensive line unit against Winnipeg, and Toronto was no exception. However, the run game was there. It was awesome. Unfortunately, the Argos were in a situation where they were trailing the whole game, and so you can't really rely on the run as much as you would like to. Like 12 carries for 111 is amazing, but that's not how you get back into a game, especially when you're down multiple scores as they were late. But again, what an amazing performance. Now, other stats, and this is where we'll get into the Arbuckle Bethel Thompson thing, and maybe I'll just cover Zach Collaros first. He had an amazing passing game. He will end up being in contention for Offensive Player of the Week in the CFL with these numbers. I know we still have a few games to go, but 32 for 40, so that's an 80% completion rate. 292 with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He was outstanding, and I didn't think he was capable of playing at this level given the skill of the Toronto secondary. My strategy coming into this game was pretty much what they did. I said stop the run, force Collaros to beat you with his arm, because I didn't think he could do it, and he did do it. Now, part of the thing is I would have been happy with surrendering 20 points to the Blue Bombers too. I felt like the Argos had more than 7 points in them. And so I think the defensive strategy worked really well. I applaud Coach Young for his defensive play. There's never in a million years would I have thought that Collaros, against this defensive secondary, the Argonauts, with no run game to support him whatsoever, was going to put up a game like that. And yeah, he did. But even at that, I think 20 points is a number in the CFL. You should be able to beat that. If you hold your opposition to 20, you're going to win most of the time. And unfortunately, not tonight for the Argos. All right, let's talk about those passing numbers for the Argonauts now. So this is a very telling thing. Remember that Bethel Thompson played almost 3 quarters. Nick Arbuckle playing a quarter and a bit. Arbuckle had the same number of completions as Bethel Thompson, and neither of them with great percentages, mind you. Bethel Thompson, 10 of 20, that's 50% obviously, for only 70 yards. And in the CFL, you cannot have 70 yards passing through 3 quarters of play. And 50% completions, there's no excuse for that. Nick Arbuckle's numbers are a little different because a lot of those throws came late and he just has to get the ball off. He's taking shots downfield. His completion percentage, I think, is misleading. He started off his play on fire. He hit his first 4 passes before eventually missing one. And I think that was more indicative of his game. He is not going to go, play after play, taking shots downfield. That's just not his style. And he was kind of forced into that position near the end of the game. So I'm going to disregard his completion percentage there. But yeah, he ended up 10 of 19 for 96 yards and an interception, which is on him. That was just it was a poor read. That's the kind of mistake that I do expect to see from Nick Arbuckle. He's still a fairly new quarterback. It's a mistake I don't think Mcleod Bethel Thompson is going to make. That's not his type of error. He had a share of mistakes this evening too. But for Nick Arbuckle, yes, sometimes he's going to lose track of a defender. And on that play, I just don't think he ever saw him. I don't think it ever occurred to him that there was a defender there. I think he was just really focused in on the linebacker play, and he just knew he needed to get it over linebacker level, and he just didn't see the halfback in there. And that was, it was just something that young quarterbacks do. And he is still inexperienced. He hasn't played in that many CFL games. He hasn't got a ton of live reps. Actually, he hasn't got any live reps until tonight. But he also, remember, Nick Arbuckle didn't get to play in either of the double blue games that the Argos had in training camp, where they actually had offense versus defense for sustained periods. His injury kept him out of those. And so this was really the first even moderately live action that he's had all year. And, it was a mistake that young quarterbacks make. So it is on him. I'm not worried about that. He'll get better. And you saw how good Nick Arbuckle can be. And maybe we can transition now into looking at the battle between those two, because I think those are really the only stats that stand out to me. It was good to see Devaris Daniels targeted more today, but he only ended up with one reception for 11 yards, which is even worse than what happened last week. And I was begging for them to get Devaris more involved. They tried to. He was targeted third most on the team behind Eric Rogers and Daniel Braverman, but they couldn't connect with him. And he was open too. He was wide open on a corner route early in the game. Bethel Thompson missed him. He was wide open on that double move. There was another play that late in the game where Arbuckle had him as well, and he just couldn't connect with him. He overthrew it. It was Arbuckle's first deep throw downfield, and he talked after the game in the press conference. He talked about that play, and he just said he'd kind of forgotten about what adrenaline does to your deep ball. And it was a pass where he just said he felt like he barely put anything on it, and then it went flying over Devaris' head. So again, that's something that's going to happen when it's your first live action, first snaps of the year. So that'll do it for stats. Let's take a look at the quarterback comparison and maybe talk about the ramifications of it. So Arbuckle versus Mcleod. Here's what I saw. First of all, Nick Arbuckle he's a better quarterback than Mcleod Bethel Thompson, but only slightly. I think at this point, I think his ceiling is much higher because, again, he hasn't had a ton of playing time. Mcleod has had a number of starts. He's played on a number of teams. He's a very experienced quarterback. Nick Arbuckle has a much higher ceiling, but what makes him a better quarterback, and maybe even a significantly better quarterback at this stage, is that he is so much more comfortable with Coach Dinwiddie's offense. And you saw it immediately when he went into that game, that last drive that they had in the third quarter. It looked like how Coach Dinwiddie's offense is supposed to look. And this is what I've seen between the two quarterbacks throughout training camp and throughout practice when I go to watch them. It's not that Mcleod Bethel Thompson can't move the ball. In fact, he connects on a number of big plays. He does some great things. He's a good quarterback. I like Mcleod Bethel Thompson a lot as a quarterback. Nick Arbuckle is slightly better because he's also a very good quarterback, but he does the right thing. I can't tell exactly what's happening downfield when I'm not in the stadium, and we've opened with 2 road games, so obviously I'm not there. The TV angles don't give you that, but I guarantee you, and it was something that Coach Dinwiddie alluded to a little bit after last week's game, there are situations that are happening on the football field, be it coverages or looks that they're getting, where Coach Dinwiddie has a response to that in mind that Mcleod Bethel Thompson is not reacting to. And Nick Arbuckle is. And what you saw in that first drive from Nick Arbuckle, short passes, we saw those RPOs built in where Arbuckle has that option. He's reading the defense, and if the correct decision is to hand off the ball, then he does. And if the correct decision is to pass it, then he does that too. That's what you saw in that first drive. There were a couple where he gave the ball to John White, and then a couple where he threw it. And the decisions, from my point of view, from what I can see, given the TSN angles, appeared to all be correct. And when I asked Arbuckle about this after the game, I asked him about just his level of comfort with RPOs. I asked him if that was specifically RPOs he's comfortable with, or if that was sort of more a big picture, he's comfortable with the offense and the RPOs are part of it. So, it's everything all together. But he said, no, it's the RPOs specifically because that's what he did at Georgia State. And having watched a lot of Georgia State film after we got Nick Arbuckle this past offseason, I can vouch for what he says about their offensive system. They run a ton of RPOs. That was the core of their offense. And so, of course, he's going to be comfortable doing that. But he's also comfortable with what Coach Dinwiddie is asking of him. When he sees the look that they have gone over in practice, he does what Coach Dinwiddie has told him to do every time he makes that read. Now, it's not going to be perfect because he's still a young quarterback. There are going to be issues like the interception that we talked about, but it just looks so much more smooth. It looked cohesive. You watch those first 3 quarters of that game and you think, what's going on here? What's the offensive plan? What's the offense doing? Are we're just throwing it downfield and hoping? And that's what it felt like for a lot of this game. And then suddenly Nick Arbuckle gets in there and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. This does have some cohesion. There is a system in place. And I don't think there's any chance that Nick Arbuckle isn't starting next week. Now, I was a little worried on that last offensive play. I know some of you were too, because I saw Twitter talking about it immediately. The last offensive play the Argos had, Arbuckle got hit low, and it looked really awkward. He went down. Immediately you're worrying about knee, and we'd already seen a couple injuries in those last couple drives, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, please no. And he got up limping and kind of limped off to the sideline. But when I asked him about his knee after the game, he said, no, it's good. And in fact, he said, I don't know if I can take him for his word here, but he said he enjoyed getting hit tonight. He said he got hit a couple times really hard, once in the face. He got hit low. And he said he liked that because it just kind of got him back into, being a football player. And it's something he hasn't gone through for a couple of years now. And it actually brought about a level of comfort for him. And, he's able to kind of get over, not having taken a hit in a couple of years, like I said. So he said the knee's fine. He's not worried about it. So I think Nick Arbuckle is your starter for next week. I don't know if Coach Dinwiddie's going to name him a starter early on. There's no benefit in doing that. I think if I were him, I'd probably say, we'll decide near the end of the week. But I think the decision has already been made. I think he's already decided Nick Arbuckle is going to be our starter week 3 at home against Winnipeg. So that's what you should expect to see. Let's talk about penalties. I don't want to talk about penalties, but we got to talk about penalties. They were an issue again today, and it's starting to become a concern because you don't want this to become a thing. Last week, there were a number of penalties. I chalked a lot of that up to adrenaline, excitement, wanting to get after the quarterback. A lot of them were on the defensive line last week. Penalties this week were all over the place, and some of them were just crucial. The worst one of all of them probably was late in the game, that 15-yard unnecessary roughness penalty that Sam Champong took, which I think on the very next play was when Collaros hit Dembski on that touchdown pass, and it was just a huge killer after what was a really nice stop, and unfortunately it was just a late hit that shouldn't have happened. And it's such a shame too, because Samuel Champong had a great game. He's a player I really liked. He's so big and he's so fast for his size. I love seeing him out there. He really flourished when unfortunately Coney Ely got injured, as we talked about earlier. He came in and just had a heck of a game, and what an unfortunate way to end the game there for him with that penalty, because he played sensationally otherwise, but that was just a killer. And just penalties were all night. At the end of the first half, we had more penalty yards than we had rushing yards or passing yards. Think about that for a second. Through one half of play, we were running the ball very well, but we still had more penalty yards than rushing yards, and we had more penalty yards than passing yards, which is inexcusable. It wasn't even close either. I think it was like 12 more yards of penalty yards than anything else. So yeah, that was That was highly frustrating and something they have to clean up. This can't become a thing week to week where they're the most penalized team in the league. And I had no problem with the officials in terms of the flags they threw. I wouldn't say it was a perfect game from the officials. There were some issues I had late. I thought there were a number of headshots late that weren't called. I thought that low hit on Arbuckle was questionable, but they weren't game changing at that point. And I think the flags that were thrown were penalties. I saw them the same way too. I actually didn't have any issues with any of the flags thrown on us in those first 3 3/4 quarters. It was just, we were making mistakes and committing penalties. So next week, that's one of the things I definitely don't want to see is flags on the ground. Let's talk about some of the injuries. Coney Ely is a concern. We got to see what his status is. But yeah, he came out and was almost immediately ruled as not returning into the game. The Argos did manage that quite well. But remember, we're weeks away from Drake Nevis returning, and that was already a vulnerable position for the Argonauts, defensive tackle. There are defensive ends all over the place. We got some great defensive ends, but we just don't have that many defensive tackles right now to turn to. So is this Achampong and Oakman next week with who? Who's going to get called up? Who's going to step in? Is there going to be a move made? Is someone going to be activated? Is Coney Ely going to be okay? It's never a good sign when they're ruled out, almost immediately. That's not great. I can't speculate, but we'll see. Hopefully he's okay. But that is going to be a huge hole, and it's going to be really tough to go back-to-back weeks and prevent Winnipeg from running the ball, especially without Coney Ely in there. Dejan Allen was another injury, and another one. Anytime it's knee, you worry. Now, there are knee injuries that aren't major, and that's what we're hoping for Dejan Allen. That's what we're hoping for Breskison, and we'll talk about his injury in a second too. But for Allen, the response to that was curious. It wasn't what I thought was going to happen. So the other two linemen that they had on their roster for this game that could have gone in, Shane Richards was the most likely to go in at left tackle. But remember, Shane Richards just hasn't really played much on the left side. His whole career, he's been a right side of the field guy. Now, he stepped in beautifully at left tackle last week and stepped in again at left guard last week and stepped in again at left guard today. But they just haven't put him out there at left tackle. And Dylan Giffen was the other option, the other backup lineman that they had. Now, he has played left tackle. That was his position at Western. And he was a very good left tackle. But he's never played left tackle in the CFL, and it's a big leap. And that's a pretty tough position to put him in there. I'm sure if they get him in, he's listed as a backup guard. And I'm sure if they get him in, his first play, his first series or first game is going to be as a guard. I think they want to acclimate him a little bit just to the speed of the league instead of just throwing him in right away at left tackle. But what they did instead of putting Richards there, which seemed the logical move, they moved Philip Blake to left tackle. Now, poor Philip Blake, who is one of the best guards in the league, isn't getting a chance to play guard. Again, today he was playing center, and when this injury occurs to Dejan Allen, Philip Blake moves to left tackle, which is extremely difficult. But it shows you what a respected lineman he is and how much respect Coach McAdoo has for him, because he knows that Philip Blake can do anything. He's such a valuable player that way, and he's nursing an injury too. Remember, he was limited in practice all week, and there he is out there playing left tackle. I haven't seen Philip Blake take a single snap at either tackle spot throughout all of training camp and throughout all of practice. I haven't seen him take a single snap there, and they had enough confidence in him to stick him out there at left tackle. That says something, but I don't think that can be the answer. So in that look, you had Peter Nicastro playing center. That's where Shane Richards came in to play left guard, and then Philip Blake playing left tackle. That can't be what this looks like next week. They need another solution for that. So maybe that means Terry Poole, if he's healthy enough to go, if they feel he's up to speed now and knows the offense, and I think he does at this point. I expect if Deshaun Allen can't go next week, I expect it to be Terry Poole. I hope Allen's okay. It would be great to have both of them as options. But in a worst case scenario, I think I guess that's not worst case scenario. I guess worst case scenario is that Terry Poole isn't out there either. And we've got Philip Blake again playing left tackle. But I just have to think there's another answer there. And hopefully we can now, with Peter Nicastro getting those snaps at center, and actually I thought he looked okay late in the game. Only watching it through once on TV, we can't really tell, so I could be way off on that. But I didn't see anything that stood out to me with his line play. And I was watching the line because I just thought it was such a curious arrangement. But hopefully the coaching staff feel comfortable enough that they can play Nicastro at center. Philip Blake can finally play guard because he's great at it. And maybe Terry Poole or hopefully, Deshaun Allen is healthy. One of the two of them can play left tackle. I'm hoping that's what this looks like against Winnipeg next week. And the last injury to talk about is Juwan Brescacin. This was crushing for me. Juwan Brescacin, he's a friend of the program, and he's been on this podcast a number of times. He's a great guy, and forget about how awesome he is as a football player, and we could go on and on about that. But he's a great human being, and just the amount of work that he does, the care that he has for the fans. Just even today, pregame, he tweeted out that he had a pair of tickets to give away to anyone in Winnipeg that would retweet his tweet. And so he's catering to largely Blue Bomber fans at that point too. But that's just the kind of guy he is. He had an opportunity to do something nice for someone, and so he was going to take it. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you were from Winnipeg or obviously you were going to be. You're not going to catch a flight from Toronto that late in the day. But that's the kind of guy he is. And I've seen him with all the charity work that he does. He's just a great human being. And when he went down, I felt crushed. And with a knee, you always fear the worst. My fingers are crossed. I hope this is just, like a mild hyperextension or something like that. Because even those, they hurt a lot. And it's that sharp, immediate pain. Like it could be anything. We have no idea. And I can't even begin to speculate. I don't know what I'm talking about medically. I have no idea. But I do know that I have seen players go down with what looked like serious knee injuries. And in one case, I had a player even well enough to go back in the game, a quarter later, and with what looked for sure like a season-ending injury. So my fingers are crossed. I'm hoping this is just something small for Juwan, and it's not something that takes his whole year away from him, because he's worked so hard and he deserves it, as much as anyone else. And so that was crushing. I hated to see that. So hopefully we're going to hear some good news about him. But fingers crossed, and definitely be thinking about Juwan Brescacin. Let's get to our offensive player of the game and defensive player of the game, offensive player of the game, and defensive player of the game. My offensive player of the game is John White. He was a difference maker today. And he also made me eat my words, because I didn't think that Toronto was going to be able to put a running game together. John White proved me wrong. Not only put a running game together, put a heck of a running game together. 112 yards, over 9 yards a carry, a touchdown run. And I know JB will be thrilled to talk about that. That was his one wish from this week, was he hoped that John White would come in and get a rushing. Actually, he didn't even care. He said it could be a quarterback sneak. That would be fine. But he just wanted to see a rushing touchdown, because it wasn't something the Argos could do in 2019. We just didn't get rushing touchdowns. Remember, we were throwing passes to Jamal Campbell and Ryan Bombin on the goal line, because the Argos could not run the ball in 2019. So to see not only a rushing touchdown, but from the running back and from 30 yards out, he had a great game. He set up his runs beautifully, made some really nice moves. He did have a costly fumble, and I want to just briefly address that. It was just one of those freak things. This isn't something that I even really pin on him. It wasn't. I know they gave someone credit for forcing that fumble. Nobody forced that fumble. What happened on that play, White was actually bringing the ball forward to secure it, as a responsible running back should do going into contact. He was on the outside, he was coming back into contact, and so he brought his arm from the side of his body to the front of his body so that he could cover up the ball with both hands. And as he was bringing it, it just kind of caught on his shoulder pads and came free. And just, you could see him losing a grip on it before he took contact. And that was a crushing fumble. But it's just one of those things that it happens to everyone at some point. And it was just really bad luck that happened to him at that time. But I'm not going to hold it against him. I still think he is the offensive player of the game. And the offensive player of the game was that touchdown run. Not only because of what John White did, but Nick Arbuckle's read. Throwing the Z quick on that play would have been absolutely the most incorrect thing you could have done. They had the halfback was flying in at 100 miles an hour. It was a great read from Arbuckle. They had set that up beautifully on that drive. John White finished it off. Easy pick for offensive player of the game. For the defensive player of the game, I'm going to go with Jamal Peters. And the numbers may not look like they back this up at first. So he was on Kenny Lawler. And I know Kenny Lawler had 10 catches for 99 yards. However, remember that this is Jamal Peters' first ever CFL game. He's in because Robertson Daniel was injured last week. And he's not only in for his first CFL game, he's lining up as the boundary corner covering Kenny Lawler, who had a huge week last week. And if you break down Lawler's numbers, yes, 10 receptions is a lot, but there was nothing big. 99 yards, less than 10 yards a catch for Lawler is a huge win for the defense. Jamal Peters played great. So he kept Lawler under control. He never let him break away. There were no big plays. No touchdowns for Lawler, and Jamal Peters had a clutch interception, and that's going to be my defensive play of the game because that would have put things out of reach at that point. The Blue Bombers were on the Toronto 25-yard line. They were already well in field goal range. It's 2nd and 8. Caleros goes deep, looking for Lawler, and Peters steps in front of it, picks it off, and he almost had that second interception. But not only did he pick that ball off, he actually returned it 30 yards, which was tied for the biggest play of the day for the Argonauts. We didn't have any passes over 30 yards. There was that one John White run. The touchdown run was the 30-yard run. So Jamal Peters actually was tied for the biggest offensive output with that 30-yard interception return. So a bunch of good things going on there for him. He played a great game. I thought he would. I talked about him very highly in our pregame podcast. I wasn't at all worried about boundary corner, and he showed us all why. I thought his performance was outstanding. So yeah, his interception is the defensive player of the game, and Jamal Peters is your defensive player of the game. We've got a lot of stuff coming up for you this week on xsandargos.com. We will have the report card coming out shortly. Also look for an article from JB, which should be out Monday, on how the Argonauts can go about winning Game 2 of this doubleheader with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Plus, I'll have a film session for you on the Argos RPO game. That will just about do things for us here on the X's and Argos podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you get a minute, please take a second to rate, review the podcast, help other Argonauts fans find us. And for any Argos fan that you know of that isn't currently listening to the podcast, get them to have a listen. That's all for me. Take care, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see you.
Together fight the foe, foe, foe.